The UFC is heading to London this weekend with a main event between Leon Edwards and Sean Brady, so I wanted to take this opportunity to run through the top 10 UK MMA fighters of all time, splitting these guys up into a tier list. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which fighters do you think should be higher? Which fighters do you think should be lower? And I think for this specific tier list, I think there are a lot of different names that could have slid into the number 10 spot. You could have had some veterans, you could have had some rising stars. So I actually have a couple of tiers of just honorable mentions. The first honorable mention tier is going to be the veterans. So guys like Brad Pickett, Lee Murray, Ross Pearson. Brad Pickett's biggest win was definitely his W against Demetrius Johnson. Now, this was a super young version of DJ. Might have been 3-0, 4-0 at the time, but beating any version of Mighty Mouse is going to be a great win. For Lee Murray, obviously doesn't have the volume, only went 1-0 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Anderson Silva outside the UFC, but he is in prison for his pretty famous bank robbery. And I think he also tried to escape from prison. So not going to have the volume, but I felt like I should have, shouted him out here. And then Ross Pearson definitely does have the volume. A 25-fight UFC veteran, went 12-13 in the UFC, won the Ultimate Fighter, didn't necessarily reach like a crazy peak within the promotion, but sticking around in the UFC for 25 fights is a real accomplishment in itself. Now, the other tier of honorable mentions I have is kind of some of the rising stars, guys who could definitely end up, cracking this list, the top 10, potentially within the next couple of years. I have Lerone Murphy and Paddy Pimblett. I think the guy I have at number 10 kind of also belongs in this tier, but I just think he has the slightly better resume so far. So Lerone Murphy, 7-0-1 in the UFC. Paddy Pimblett 6-0. Lerone Murphy is currently ranked number 10. Paddy Pimblett is ranked number 12. Both guys who could continue to climb and find themselves within the top 10. And then the guy I mentioned, I just have this tier titled Young Contender because there's only one guy in this tier. This is where I have Muhammad Mokaev. Now, there might be some discrepancy on the guys that I'm considering from the UK or like representing the UK. I know Paddy Pimblett had an issue with Muhammad Mokaev kind of representing himself in that way. But the way that I look at it is that if you move to the UK as a child and you currently represent them now, I think that qualifies you, because even some of the most famous guys like Leon Edwards, Michael Bisping, neither of them were born within the UK. And I think pretty much everyone would consider them, for this list. So Muhammad Mokaev, 7-0 in the UFC, got cut from the UFC when he was ranked at number 6, has solid wins against Manel Kape, Alex Perez, Tim Elliott, and still just so young, like 23 years old. I do hope he finds his way back to the UFC. I think it's crazy to cut someone that young, that talented in a weight class where you do need contenders. So I hope he gets back, to the big show. But I think even at this point with his resume, getting up to number 6, being undefeated, I think number 10 is honestly a fair spot for him. And then tier 2, this is going to be a pretty large tier. This is just where we have the guys who are contenders. Some of these guys have fought for titles. Others have got very, very close or are currently close. And my number 9 is going to be Dan Hardy. He has a 6-4 UFC record, started off 4-0 in the UFC, earned a title shot against George St. Pierre, then went on a rough streak. I think he won back-to-back fights. And then he ended up having to retire or step away from the UFC at 32 years old due to a heart condition. So unfortunately, he just doesn't have a ton of volume. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to build up another win streak to potentially get back to a title shot, but still has a very successful career. Getting to a title shot in the UFC is a real accomplishment. And so he's going to come in here at number 9. At number 8, I have Paul Daley. And I did find it difficult to rank some of the guys who spent the majority of their career outside the UFC, but he just has such an insane volume of fights in different promotions. I do think he belongs here in the top 10. He fought in pro bouts from 2003 all the way to 2022 when he eventually retired, has a 44-18-2 career record, 33 career knockouts. Like I said, didn't fight a ton in the UFC, only went 2-1 in their promotion. He ended up getting cut because he sucker punched Josh Koscheck after the bell, and then the UFC was just like done with him after that. He did pick up a solid win against Martin Kampmann in the UFC, so did get a quality win in there. Went 2-3 in Strikeforce, but was fighting great competition. Had an amazing one-round fight against Nick Diaz where it looks like he had him finished in the first. Nick Diaz comes back, ends up finishing him before the first round ends, so that was a great performance, or just a great overall fight to watch. And then he went to Bellator where he spent the biggest chunk of his career, went 10-5, had some success. So maybe he doesn't have that peak performance or a spot where he earned a title shot in the UFC or earned a title shot and won in another big promotion. But I just think the volume makes it fair that he slots into this top 10. Then at number 7, someone who does not have the volume but has the high quality wins, we have Jimi Manuwa, and he went 6-6 in the UFC. You look at that record, you're probably not thinking anything of it. Probably someone who fought like outside the top 15, maybe cracked the top 15 at some point, but like did have some sort of long, amazing career. He has an absolutely insane strength of schedule. Looking at some of his best wins, he has a KO win against Corey Anderson. He has a KO win against Ovince St. Preux when he was, relevant within the weight class. And then he has a decision win over Jan Blachowicz. Those are 3 extremely impressive wins. And he pretty much was like 1 W short of a title shot. He got a number 1 contender fight against Volkan Ozdemir. The winner of that one would go on to fight DC for the light heavyweight title. He lost it, so he never got that title shot. But then when you're looking at his losses, like this is just an insane crop of guys. He lost to, in the UFC, his 6 losses, Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Johnson, Volkan Ozdemir, Jan Blachowicz, Thiago Santos, and Alexander Rakic. Like, that is pretty much exclusively top 5 level competition. And so even though he had 12 fights in the UFC, I think the quality of, opponents he faced, the wins he does have, I do think it slots him in here in the number 7 spot. Then at number 6, I have someone who just recently got to the UFC, but is a little bit older. I have Michael Venom Page. Once again, kind of tough to compare these guys who fought the majority of their career outside the UFC, but he was very successful in Bellator, 17-2 record, got to a title shot there. He's gone 2-1 so far in the UFC and, been competitive against solid opponents and probably outside of his fighting prime. Like I think a few years ago is probably when we were looking at prime MVP. And he is still, putting up tough fights against some of the best guys in the world. Some of his best wins in Bellator, I think his best 2 were probably Douglas Lima and then Paul Daley, who I already talked about. And then in the UFC, like I know Kevin Holland's kind of on a rough streak, still an impressive debut. And then going up in weight and beating Shara Magomedov, I think is a pretty impressive, notch on his belt and could age well if Shara goes on to have a very successful career up at middleweight. So MVP here at number 6. Then getting into the top 5 here, we're still in the same tier. I have Darren Till. Now, his overall UFC record isn't great, 6-5-1, pretty much a 500 fighter in the UFC. But I think it's more fair to just look at his peak, where he starts off 5-0-1, ends up getting to a title shot against Tyron Woodley, has some quality wins against Stephen Thompson, Kelvin Gastelum, Donald Cerrone. I know everyone likes to talk about like the downfall of Darren Till, and I think a lot of people think he was pushed, a little bit too soon, and that might be true. I think a bigger factor is just the injuries, and then also the inability to find the right weight class. Like in his rise to that title shot, he missed weight twice at 170, but then when he eventually made the move up to 185, like he didn't look big for the weight class. He didn't look like he added the muscle, to compete with those guys. He kind of just looked like a softer, more out of shape version of the guy at 170. And I do think a decent amount of that was the injuries he had. Like if you look at the guy that's fighting like Derek Brunson or DDP, that is not the same guy that's going out there fighting Donald Cerrone, fighting Wonderboy, even the version of Darren Till that fought Robert Whittaker. Like that was a very competitive fight against Whittaker, who was like pretty close to potentially in his prime at that point. Then the injuries kind of took over. It's unfortunate. He even in his last UFC fight was very, very competitive against DDP. Like I think that was a 1-1 fight. Maybe the first was a 10-8 for DDP, but like very competitive fight until he was finished in the 3rd round. But seemed like the grappling never really got there, and injuries also could have played a big factor there. But when we're looking at his peak, someone who really just rose up the rankings, got a title shot, fell short, but still an overall successful career. Then my number 4, and the last guy in this tier, someone who hasn't reached the same peak as a Darren Till in terms of getting the title shot, but he has gone 11-2 in the UFC, and that is Arnold Allen. He has peaked at number 4 in the world at featherweight, and maybe you think these guys who earned a title shot should be higher. I just think sometimes title shots can be somewhat subjective based on your star power, based on the depth of the weight class. Like, I think there could have been a case that Arnold Allen deserved the interim title shot over either Yair or Emmett. I think probably Yair at that point, but like he could have been in that opportunity, could have earned his way to a title shot, doesn't have the biggest name. Activity has been an issue for him, but he has a lot of quality wins. Dan Hooker, Calvin Kattar, Giga Chikadze, Sadiq Youssef, Gilbert Melendez. And I do think at this point, like looking at the featherweight weight class with Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway moving up, I do think that Arnold Allen is like the dark horse of this weight class. Because if Diego Lopez goes out there, beats Volkanovski, which is, not insane to see, You're looking at guys like Arnold Allen, Movsar Evloev. You have like the Pitbull Yair Rodriguez fight. Like this weight class is wide open. And so I don't think it would be crazy if Arnold Allen came in and ended up winning the belt at some point within the next few years. But even without that belt, even without getting the title shot, only 2 career losses or UFC losses to Max Holloway and Movsar Evloev. Solid resume. I like him here to round out the contender tier. And then I think pretty much everyone's clear top 3 at this point. We have the champ tier. Now, this might be controversial. In my number 3 spot, I have Michael Bisping. Now, he obviously has way more volume over the other 2 I have ahead of him. 20-9 in the UFC. Very, very impressive. He is first in terms of all-time middleweight wins with 16. He won the Ultimate Fighter. He was the first English champion. And he has 2 title wins, right? The KO win against Luke Rockhold, which has to be the best win on his resume. Like, people, I think, look back on Luke Rockhold like he was kind of like a joke or a meme. At that point, like, Luke Rockhold looked like he was going to run the weight class for a very, very long time. And Bisping just like put an abrupt end to that and then defended the belt against Dan Henderson. Kind of a cherry-picked matchup, competitive fight, but a title defense is going to be a quality win. Also wins against Anderson Silva, not prime Silva, but still a good form of him. Chris Lieben, Tylis Latis, also great wins. And then also just the fact that he was fighting with one eye in his prime. Like, I know people always talk about that, but that truly is insane. The fact that he's winning the belt, defending the title, fighting a guy like GSP with one eye, it really is wild. I do just think I have 2 guys ahead of him at this point, and my number 2 is going to be Tom Aspinall. Now, like I said, doesn't have the same amount of volume. Like, he has the same number of UFC fights as Michael Bisping has losses in the UFC. He's 9 losses. Tom Aspinall is 8-1 in the promotion. It's just been the dominance that he has showed. 8 finishes, 7 knockouts, 1 submission win. Only 1 fight has gone into the second round. And I think at this point, maybe this is why I'm higher on Tom Aspinall. I am not viewing him as the interim heavyweight champion. I am viewing him as the legit heavyweight champ. I don't know how anyone at this point would look at John Jones, the fact that he's fought 2 times in the last 5 years, and you're looking at who he's beating. Cyril Gane shouldn't have been in the mix for a title shot. Stipe Miocic also shouldn't have been walking into a title shot. Like, his wins at heavyweight where he's holding the belt, those are just not championship caliber matchups in my opinion. And so you look at Tom Aspinall, I think when he beat Sergey was the guy who rightfully should have been fighting for the title instead of Stipe against John Jones. So I view that as a quality win. And then I think the same thing for Curtis Blaydes. Like, if Jones is not here, which, like I said, I'm not really viewing him as the heavyweight champ, like, Blaydes would have been a deserving challenger. And so I view him pretty much being the undisputed guy, having 2 title wins, has wins against Blaydes, Pavlovich, Volkov, Tybura, Sergey Spivak, and I just think he's going to continue to build at this point. But I think he has the peak that a guy like Michael Bisping reached. Maybe doesn't have the signature win against a Luke Rockhold, but I just think the lack of losses, his only UFC loss was against Curtis Blaydes, and the fact that he has also already gotten to 2 title wins, that is why I give him the slight edge here. And then my number 1, probably not shocking at this point, Leon Edwards, a 14-3 UFC record, has 3 title wins, 2 wins over Kamaru Usman, a win over Colby Covington, RDA, Donald Cerrone, Nate Diaz, Gunnar Nelson. He does have a pretty solid resume leading up to the belt, just because he was never getting that push, so he kind of just kept having to win fights, which, has racked up a pretty decent resume. Obviously, one of the most iconic moments in UFC history with the head kick KO in the final round against Kamaru Usman. The defense, I think a very impressive win. The Colby Covington win, not aging great just because he didn't deserve that shot and he's looked terrible since then. But, he beat the guy in front of him and then he could still continue to build on this. He beat Sean Brady right in the mix for another title shot, probably 1 more win away. But I do view Leon Edwards here as the number 1. Most title wins for a UK champion. Just not losing a ton of fights, 3 career losses in the UFC. I do have Leon here in my number 1 spot. But let me know your thoughts. Who was I too high on? Who was I too low on? Should Bisping have been number 1? Should Aspinall have been number 1? Let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.